most significant restrictions when it comes to a project and the trade-offs between them. These three restrictions, referred to as the triple constraints, are scope, time, and cost. Let's start by defining each of them, starting with scope. What is project scope? Scope is the detailed set of deliverables or features of a project that comes from the project requirements. It defines what will be done as part of the project and what the result of the project will be. Scope needs to be planned, well-defined, validated, and controlled. There are many deliverables related to scope that helps define and understand the project. Some of these include a work breakdown structure, project scope statement, various documents and progress reports, as well as the result of the project itself. The next constraint is time. What is time for a project? Time is defined as the time that is needed to complete the project. A project generally has a deadline that it needs to be completed by. Generally, a project schedule is created with this deadline in mind. Individual tasks within the project have a specific time that it should be completed by to keep the project moving to meet the project's time goal. A Gantt chart can be used to better understand a task's time and goals and requirements. Here's an example of what one would look like. Each task within the project has a time to be completed, as well as showing task dependencies to one another. The last constraint is cost. What is cost? Cost is how much a project will cost overall. There are many factors when it comes to a project cost, with two major types. The first type is direct costs. Direct costs are directly related to creating what is needed for the project. Some examples include the cost of paying employees and the cost of any hardware and software. The second is indirect costs. These are costs that are not directly related to the products or services by the project. Some examples of indirect costs are the cost of necessities for the employees or the cost of electricity being used by the building. There are other types of costs, such as reserve costs that are put aside by the organization for the future use, if necessary, or sunken costs, which shouldn't be added into the project's cost total. The triple constraints are very closely related to each other. If one constraint increases or decreases, at least one of the other constraints will as well. Let's look at each individually. Increasing the scope increases time and cost of the project as well. To keep the project on schedule while increasing the scope, the costs will have to increase to allow for additional resources to handle the new increased scope. The same can be said for the reverse as well. Decreasing a project scope can lower the cost and overall project time. To lower the time for a project, either the scope will have to decrease, which may lower costs, or the cost will have to increase if the scope remains the same. The increase of costs would account for the extra resources, such as employees or equipment, to be able to meet the new lower time goal. Decreasing costs can be a bit of a different matter. Decreasing costs can be done by cutting time, but scope will generally follow along with it. There are things that can be done to keep time and scope the same, such as by outsourcing or potentially finding cheaper alternatives to hardware or software. These options may prove difficult depending how far into a project the organization is, or how easy it is to integrate these options into your project. The triple constraints work very closely with each other. Generally, when one changes, at least one of the other constraints will change as well. Changing one of them will affect a project in their own ways, and will need to be handled appropriately to ensure the project continues smoothly and will finish on schedule.